Stephen Van Patten. Um, this piece I'm about to read is part of what happens in Brookwater's Curse, Volume 2. Um, so be a little difficult to explain everything that precedes this, but basically what this depicts is a two vampires having a fight, but they're a little more than just vampires. One is a witch, and she's part of let's just call it a multicultural conglomerate. The other one is an old school vampire who actually has control of lightning strikes. So, and the basic strategy in the fight is that the vampire witch, who is from Senegal, by the way, is trying to cut the distance between her and the lightning strike vampire so that she can effectively kill him or at least beat him or something. So anyway, it's from the chapter Chirac versus Mosi, and you'll figure out who's who in a second. Okay. Chirac stood at the far end of the courtyard. He patiently waited until he was absolutely sure everyone was outside before he brought down the first blast. Krakow! Caleb and the other Rachasas, shapeshifters, were rendered unconscious immediately. Something about Rachasa physicality prevented them from withstanding any sort of high electrical current. Helen, one of the other vampires, was blown back into the lobby, also knocked out. She'd awakened with shards of broken glass in her back. At least she would awaken, which was more that can be said for several of the Senegalese. The 10 drummers were dead, burned beyond recognition. 6 of them were thrown off the retractable walkway and into the stairwell. The djembe drums they were carrying were left smoldering and broken where they'd fallen. Christian, the main hero vampire of the story, was hurt, but he, Hansu, and the samurais continued to run across the walkway. Krakow! Little more than 10 yards covered, and nearly half of the remaining Senegalese were down, presumably dead. Christian felt the bite of several third-degree burns. Mosi was still Mosi still stood and moved forward. She leaned on the halberd. It was miraculous considering that she was the center target of the first 2 blasts. So far, she was fine and stepping off the walkway. Blam! The samurais, in order to compensate for the lost Senegalese, surrounded Mosi to absorb some of the third blast. It would cost them. 3 would die, and the others, except for Hansu, would be too injured to continue. Kaboom! The werewolves tried to run ahead, circle around, and attack from the right. So Chirac brought down a lightning bolt especially for them. Mosi and the others made some progress as the werewolf leader was practically incinerated. The other 5 were shocked, burned, and left lying on the ground. Two of the 5 changed back to human form, a telltale sign that they were dead or very close to it. Kablam! The dark sky went nearly white as the worst blast so far assails them. Nearly all of the Senegalese were taken out. Christian was flung backwards. Flipping in midair, he lands hard on his stomach. He forced himself back up and saw Mosi still moving, but she was much slower and bleeding from a large gash on her side. The only monster left walking with Mosi now was Hansu, one of the vampire samurai, who stopped just as the sky started to crackle. Christian watched in horror as Lord Tanada's second in command unsheathed his katana sword and held it over his head. Hansu! Christian screamed. What are you doing? Their eyes answered, I'm making it up in the next play. No, Hansu, wait! Christian's panic pleas were ignored as the laws of physics take precedent. Mosi continues to walk across the courtyard, absorbing only a small amount of the blast. Ansu takes the rest. In one white hot flash, his sword hilt is fused to his hand and his face nearly splits open. It's the last thing Christian sees before a portion of the blast hits him and knocks him out. Poor Mosi was alone, and she still had 20 yards to walk before reaching Chirac. Good evening, Mosi, Chirac called out to her. He stopped his assaults and allowed her to get within 10 yards of him. He wanted a response from her, but Mosi said nothing. Despite the charges of lightning that struck her repeatedly, she seemed to be holding up well. Just so you know, you're not the first adversary I've faced who managed to shake off lightning, Chirac said. Mosi twitched slightly, but gave no indication that she'd heard him. She kept advancing, and for the first time since his nearly forgotten childhood, Chirac felt a pang of anxiety in his belly. Of course, I can't say I've ever faced a more attractive opponent, he said, as the sky opened up again, sending another blue-white bolt of energy down on Mosi. Kablam! Frozen in place, with no other vampires standing with her to share the damage, Mosi shook violently. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and for a brief second, it seemed like she'd finally fall over. Your reputation is well earned, my dear, Chirac said as the last of the lightning bolt dissipated. Brava! A single tear hissed as it rolled down Mosi's hot face. Her eyes were burning scarlet, her face filled with torment. Steam rose from her skin. She seemed to be having trouble keeping her voluptuous lips together. Still, she moved forward. Isn't there anything you'd like to say? Chirac jeered. Despite the fact that Mosi continued to advance, Chirac believed he had the situation under control. It was hard for him to think otherwise when he could see the considerable damage that his last lightning bolt had created. Mosi's clothes were damaged to the point that she was almost naked. There was nothing left of her hair except her blistered scalp. Sections of her dark skin were burned well past the point a physician would bother to classify. She was a stubborn one, but even the strongest vampire in the world could not do this for much longer. Chirac took a few steps forward, inadvertently helping her to close the distance between them. He wanted to know what kind of magic spell would allow a vampire to take this kind of punishment and still be on her feet. He was willing to dissect Mosi to find out. That meant, however, that he couldn't strike her with lightning again if he wanted something left to examine. Don't you want to say anything? He asked. Now that she was 15 feet away, it did seem like she was finally going to speak. Chirac, a lover of drama and poetry, always enjoyed hearing the dying words of his adversaries. He stepped closer so he could hear her last thoughts before taking her neck in his hand. Only when he saw the lightning coming from between her lips did he understand that Mosi's spell didn't allow her to deflect the lightning. The spell helped her to store the energy within her own body as though she were a living battery. A concentrated electric beam erupted from Mosi's throat. The blast dislodged her jaw, melted her eyes, and nearly tore her face off as it struck Chirac in the abdomen. For 30 seconds, Chirac was enveloped in the charge, screaming as the current ripped through his body. Chirac could feel his stomach tearing open. He might have tried to fold up into a protective stance, but his brain had lost the ability to communicate with the rest of his body. As Mosi continued to regurgitate electricity, Her skin began to flake and peel off until burnt muscle and bone were visible. Chirac could see she was dying and marveled at how, after nearly 2,000 years, someone finally had the courage to do what it took to kill him. Even as she was being torn apart, Mosi continued to step forward until she was close enough to raise Lord Tanada's halberd high over her head and bring it down in a sweeping motion, cutting Chirac across his already ruptured midsection. Chirac's severed torso fell, bounced, and rolled 10 feet. The legs stood their ground. Mosi's energy attack ended as abruptly as it had started. Finally able to feel the pain, Mosi lifted her head and screamed like the damned. Windows shattered for miles across Osaka. Had her eyes still been intact, she would have seen a large flock of crows lift into the air just under Chirac's storm clouds. When the scream ended, and when the scream ended and all of the air pushed out of her smoldering, massacred body, Mosi collapsed. A light rain began to fall as the earth and the sky each said goodbye to their respective champions. Thank you for having me. And yeah.